Chapter 421, Mocking Before Fighting. When Xuanhuan dodged, he had lost control of his sword ball, which missed its target and whistled past Fang Qi's ear, cutting off one strand of his hair. Mr. Fang felt some heat on his face and touched it, feeling a bloody scratch. The cultivators around him were all stupefied. Livid, Xuanhuan covered his armless shoulder where blood gushed out. He had great pride in the sword ball and the heaven-seeking sword palace's exquisite sword techniques. But to his astonishment, his opponent cut off his arm a few exchanges later. Impetuous man! Xuanhuan spluttered in anger. This kid just doesn't know how great my sword techniques are. This set of sword techniques was called Sky-Startling 9 Strikes, and there were 72 variations derived from the 9 strikes. However, he had only used a few variations out of the 72 before he could unleash the profound techniques. He was injured already. Mr. Fang shrugged and continued to explain, "Don't waste your breath on him. I just aim to kill with one attack. How could he fight with me? He had no choice but to dodge." Got it, sir. You're awesome." The bullet comments all praised and boasted. Novel full. At this moment, Xuanhuan's face turned even darker. "Aren't you afraid that my heaven-seeking sword palace will butcher all the living beings in your force? Do you know what existence you're messing with?" "What existence?" Mr. Fang looked at the cultivators of the Li family beside him. "Guys, can you explain it to me?" Li Lanruo didn't know how to answer since she just couldn't understand the young man standing before her. She was even more puzzled about the young man's sword techniques. The flying sword moved as fast as the sword ball, showing no disadvantage before the heaven-seeking sword palace. More astonishing was that this young man was so audacious that he cut off one of Xuanhuan's arms. "Which faction are you from?" Xuanhuan said with a sneer. "Do you dare to reveal your background? I want to know what force has the audacity to mess with my heaven-seeking sword palace." Mr. Fang answered, "I told you that I'm from the Heaven-Defying Online Games Guild. It's fine that you don't want to tell me." Xuanhuan looked vicious. "I'll kill you. You're alone, but I brought more than 100 elites of the heaven-seeking sword palace who have formed the immortal hacking sword array. However powerful you are, I don't believe that you can escape from it." "Immortal hacking sword array? It sounds powerful. Have you heard of it before?" The audience in the shops looked at each other in bafflement. Su Tianji drank up the last bit of soup in the bowl. "I haven't heard of it. I guess it's nothing extraordinary." At this moment, the cultivators who were hiding around finally showed themselves. The black figures quickly surrounded Fang Qi, flashing around him like black clouds. Many vague sword lights shot up like dancing dragons, and the whole array looked like a furious dragon from the prehistoric time. With a vicious face, Xuanhuan suppressed the excruciating pain in his shoulder and looked at Fang Qi with endless hatred in his eyes. "You dared to cut off one of my arms. You can't repay it even if you die hundreds of times." And his right hand waved, and the sword ball began to spin with clear dragon roar sounds. "Do you think I, Xuanhuan, have no other trump card but the sword ball?" With a furious roar, the sword array was activated with turbulent clouds and winds. Many sword energies gathered before him and followed the movements of the sword ball. Instantly, people saw a silver dragon dancing in the clouds. With a resonant dragon roar, the swords fell like a silver river from the heaven, hacking toward Fang Qi. "This sword array once killed an immortal from heaven. I'll see how you block it." With his furious roar, the long dragon crashed down with a turbulent ocean of clouds, as if the sky itself was falling. "So powerful. This sword aura can't be blocked by human means. It's astonishing that a mere divine ocean realm cultivator can unleash such great power." At this moment, even the Xuanhuan Palace Master and Yugzh Mountain Master looked at the big screen in surprise. "Can the shop owner block it? Will he use Orochi Divine Light?" Sitting at the counter, Zhao Yulv placed several pieces of spiritual melons before him, and he ate them while watching the live stream on the big screen. "Isn't there a 36 Tiangang Grand Array in the Legend of the Sword and Fairy? He can use that one. They have more than 100 people supporting the array." Someone said, "The power of an array built by one person is no match for an array built by more than 100 people, right? What can he do then?" The two old men stared at the big screen and asked in a daze. On the other side, the woman in a white silk dress, the elder, and the disciples of the Li family looked desperate. A tiny part of the power of heaven-seeking sword palace could crush them. It wasn't a power that a family like theirs could block. It was why many forces traveled all the way to study in the Heavenly Academy, since only in the Heavenly Academy could they gain a glimpse of hope. Finished. They were all finished. No, even if I must die, I can die like a coward. The woman in white silk dress looked desperate. If I use that force. She sensed the disc in her body and felt a terrifying force inside. It was made of a unique material that was neither gold or jade. If she activated it, it would unleash earth-shaking power. She yelled furiously and dashed toward the horrifying dragon of fury and despair. Before she could do anything, a hand caught her collar. Damn it! Get out of my way! She was tossed back. Mr. Fang glanced at the system interface. Complete synchronization. Synchronization conditions require possession of key items of a character. Total synchronization must reach 20%. The synchronization time is determined by item's quality, total synchronization, and your own strength. Character can be completely synchronized. Dante. Weapons in possession, Beowulf and Xuanhuan. Total synchronization, 20.36%. Current strength, level 2 King Warrior Realm. Synchronization time, 5 seconds. Weapons can be used, Beowulf and Xuanhuan. Recovery time, 1 second per week. A row of strange data suddenly flashed in Fang Qi's eyes. Then, Fang Qi seemed to have to change into another person. Fang Qi irises turned ice blue and his hair white, and his blue and white robe was turned dark red. On his hands and feet were dark silver armor like gauntlets and long greaves. The cultivators of the Li family watched this scene before them in bafflement. This party is getting crazy. Many sword energies were about to crash onto him like an ancient furious dragon, but this man hooked his fingers on both of his hands and mocked. Li Lanruo, who had tried to die with her enemies in despair, felt like she was blinded by this sight. The cultivators and warriors watching the live stream in the shop froze. Is this Dante? Chapter 422. Do you want to join my guild? Everyone saw Fang Qi's mocking gesture while the horrifying sword power crashed down with turbulent clouds from the high sky. Then, the surging force poured down like a river from heaven and engulfed him. Nangongjuan snared at the scene. He brushed Fang Qi's strange transformation off his mind, since he knew that Fang Qi was a dead man now. In his eyes, even a true immortal wouldn't be able to save Fang Qi from this horrifying sword light. Finally, he looked satisfied and pleased. On the other hand, the others looked horrified. He's dead? When people were musing with this thought, the sky that was filled with crazy clouds and wind suddenly began to clear. While the horrifying force passed them, they saw an unbelievable scene. The white-haired young man who was in the red windbreaker stood where he was with his hands in his pockets. What happened? The cultivators of the Li family exchanged looks of bafflement. At this moment, the turbulent clouds attached to the tail of the dragon-like, terrifying sword power slowly dispersed. Then, the dragon created by the many sword energies from the sword array began to shatter, beginning from its mouth. Like dominoes, the collapse of the heart of the array caused a bigger chain reaction. Then, all the sword energies shattered one after another, and only the sword ball, which looked like a dragon ball, was left. Crack! A crack suddenly appeared on the sword ball after the noise. A second crack appeared. The third. The fourth. What did you do? Nangongjuan had never felt so scared before. More horrifying was that his rival seemed to only be standing there and didn't do anything, and the whole immortal hacking sword array collapsed. The array was pushed back by force, and the horrifying backlash enveloped all the people who were forming the array. The 100 elites from the heaven-seeking sword palace that Nangongjuan took great pride in were instantly devoured by this horrifying force and then exploded, creating a big mass of bloody mist. Nangongjuan screamed but had no hope of blocking this force that brought him desperation. In horror, he stared at the man calmly standing on the flying sword. Although the white hair and the red clothes had vanished, Fang Qi still looked like a demon to him. He stared at the man before him intently and said, "The heaven-seeking sword palace will not let you get away with it." Boom! He was turned into dust. Everything was gone with the wind except for a faint blood smell that permeated the air. All the cultivators and warriors watching the live stream in the Xuanhuan city shop and the half-city shop were stunned. Do you guys know what the shop owner did? I saw nothing in the battle. I only saw him mocking that guy. How did he do it? Was that the power of a dark knight? Xuanhuan, who was watching the live stream with the others from the Nanhua faction on the couch, had excitement in her eyes. The shop owner is FCKING awesome. She cussed since cultured words couldn't express her feelings right now. Ugh? Sitting nearby, Yu Yan whispered, How come the first elder is even more excited than us? The Zuchi spiritual master looked embarrassed. Senior sister, please sit down first. Demonic woman Ningbai, who had half-demon bloodline, stared at the big screen with great interest while sipping her milk tea. She sent a message, asking, "Sir, what technique did you just use? How come we don't know about it?" She added an emoji at the end of her question since no one would know that this message came from her. "What technique?" Mr. Fang explained, "I just used release." The ultimate release. Was it release in such a short moment? After all, he had only the blink of an eye after his mocking gesture. He couldn't have done it even if he were 1 second slower. In the game, one could use release by pressing one button. However, in the real world, one must proficiently spread the strength of the Royal Guard style all over the body in 1 moment. His timing must be so exact that just by being 1 millisecond faster or slower would result in a disaster. He could only perfectly absorb all his opponent's force using the perfect technique in that flash. If he made a tiny mistake in timing or usage of the technique, he would be killed or at least severely wounded in a battle of this scale. It could only be achieved by Fang Qi, who had activated complete synchronization with Dante and thus possessed extremely great power. When he used ultimate release, he remained intact while the immortal hacking sword array was instantly shattered. Under the terrified gazes of the cultivators of the Li family, Mr. Fang flew over to them. Let me explain. I'm just a passerby who wants to ask you for directions." Mr. Fang looked sincere and harmless. The cultivators of the Li family were speechless. In fact, they were dumbfounded. How can anyone ask for directions this way? He had just exploded Xuanhuan and his immortal hacking sword array, and then he tells me that he just wants to ask for directions? That elder of the Li family's old face twitched, and he was at a loss for words. "I'm Li Lanruo, and I'm greatly grateful for your help, Senior," the woman wearing the white silk dress spoke. She was elegant and beautiful despite the difficult situation she was in. Of course, if she didn't look embarrassed, she would look even better. Mr. Fang lightly nodded and said, "Do you know how to get to the Heavenly Academy?" Li Lanruo was startled. "Heavenly Academy? Are you going to the Heavenly Academy, Senior?" Fang Qi was pleased. "It seems like the Heavenly Academy is quite famous. Even this woman that I encountered knows about it." However, Mr. Fang didn't think that going to the Heavenly Academy was a big deal and wondered why she acted so astonished. Fang Qi said, "Yeah, is there anything wrong with that?" "No," Li Lanruo said in embarrassment. "Senior, are you planning to go to the Heavenly Academy as well?" Then, astonishment appeared on her pretty face. "Could it be that you plan to enroll in the Heavenly Academy as well?" Fang Qi's face turned dark. "Do you think I look like someone who has that plan?" Li Lanruo looked at him and found that this man was young enough to be a disciple. However, if that is real, his strength is too terrifying to be a disciple. Could it be that he is from a super powerful yet hermit family? With unease, she said, "Senior, you killed so many elites from the Heaven-Seeking Sword Palace and even Xuanhuan, who was the disciple of the head of the Heaven-Seeking Sword Palace." Mr. Fang said, "Don't always tell me how awesome the Heaven-Seeking Sword Palace is. To tell you the truth, my heaven-defying online games guild is truly awesome. Do you guys want to join?" Li Lanruo, Li Waya, the elder who had lost one arm, was also at a loss for words. So were the other members of the Li family. This advertisement deserved full marks. Chapter 423, Yuanyang City. Join. They froze. "Join your guild?" He had asked them if they wanted to join his guild. Li Lanruo was at a loss for words. For her, it had been a narrow escape that she had survived the raid by people from the Heaven-Seeking Sword Palace, and she was still feeling unnerved by it. However, the mysterious senior now invited her to join his guild. "Novel full certainly, I want to join it," she said, "but I've caused you enough trouble today by making you a foe of the Heaven-Seeking Sword Palace. How can I bring more trouble to you?" The people in Half City all sent bullet comments. "No trouble at all." He even beat Nanhu, a fairy loose mount with a brick, and suppressed an old demon into a smirking face emoji. "There's nothing that this old demon doesn't dare to do." Ruining. "My goodness, even old demon Fang can be a senior." People like Ruining and Ziyu commented while they watched the live stream. "Soon, old demon Fang will lead the newbies off the orthodox way." Looking at the bullet comments, Mr. Fang said while his face twitched, "Can you guys stop trying to cause trouble?" Then, he said to the people who he rescued, "It's no trouble at all. They messed with our heaven-defying online games guild, and it's them who are in trouble." Thus the elder stroked his beard and thought for a while before saying, "Then, I thank you on behalf of Li family. Heaven-defying online games guild, they thought. It sounds powerful. Li Lanruo thought, the senior's strength is so high, and he has a powerful force behind him. Is it possible? Startled, she glanced at Fang Qi subconsciously and thought, is it possible that he has reached the realm of returning to youth from old age that is described in the legends? Mr. Fang's identity had now changed from old demon Fang to the righteous senior Fang who had returned to youth after living for hundreds or thousands of years. In Half City, the people thought that he could be 200 years old. Now, he was over 500 years old in these people's eyes. Of course, Mr. Fang was oblivious to their speculations. As a young man in his 20s, he knew nothing about the presence and aura of a grandmaster. Perhaps the others thought that he was old since he looked dominating. Mr. Fang might be lacking in some areas, but he indeed knew how to show off. With hands in his pockets, he leisurely flew on his flying sword while the others tried to catch up with him. Even though the cultivators of Li family were trying their best and had white foam around their mouths due to fatigue, the distance between them got greater each second. Then, Mr. Fang turned to them. The flying speed of people in this place isn't very fast. Do you want me to take you on the flight? The cultivators of the Li family all nodded enthusiastically. The journey was enjoyable while they flew past the famous mountains and rivers on the flying swords. On the way, Fang Qi showed the cultivators and warriors from both shops the scenery beyond the deserted sea realm. As new members of the guild, Li Lanruo and the others acted as tour guides and explained to Fang Qi the customs of this place and the forces on it. Look at the herds of demon beasts below. Look up at the huge demon bird. We don't have such creatures here. A blue-feathered, sparrow-like demon bird that was tens of meters long flew over Fang Qi and the others, casting a shadow on them. They flew past many spiritual mountains and beautiful rivers full of demon beasts and birds. On their way, they saw several places where cultivators gathered and passed by some cultivator and warrior forces. Many cultivators lived in the cities built high on the mountains, presenting to Fang Qi and the people in the two shops a world more prosperous than the deserted sea realm. More importantly, they rarely saw ordinary people in the big cities. There were even cultivators and warriors stationed in remote towns where ordinary people lived. They would find and recruit talented mortals to cultivate and train in their factions. Even the mortals with ordinary talent had the opportunity to learn some skills to defend the towns or hunt demon beasts for a living. The warriors here toughened their bodies with special techniques, so they didn't have to spend a fortune on elixirs and spiritual plants, which made it quite easy to become an official warrior. With the abundant spiritual essence in this world, it was a great place for cultivators and warriors to live. Xuanhuan City is right there before us. Li Lanruo pointed forward at a huge city on a high mountain that was flanked by high cliffs and surrounded by other mountains. This is the nearest big city to Heavenly Academy. Before the academy begins the exam, the disciples from all the major forces would stay here. Each exam of the Heavenly Academy would attract elites from all over the world. Li Lanruo said, even the world-famous families will send their young members to study in the Heavenly Academy. Some factions will even send their direct disciples to cultivate in the Heavenly Academy. This awesome? Fang Qi clicked his tongue and looked at the elegant woman wearing the silk dress. From the looks of it, it will be very hard for you to get into the Heavenly Academy, right? You still traveled so far to try it. At this topic, Li Lanruo said sadly, I was forced into a corner and have to try it. With a heavy sigh, the elder who had lost one arm said, Nangongjuan's pursuit of us means that the Li family of Zhifeng Cliff has probably been wiped off the world. I'm afraid that even the other families in Zhifeng Cliff have gotten the same fate. We're the last of the family, and we have to try to sustain the family bloodline. Mr. Fang said, how come you guys are in such a terrible state? The others looked embarrassed. They looked at each other, and Li Lanruo said, it's not that I love the treasure so much that I don't want to hand it over. The truth is that the mystic fate jade has merged with my bloodline, and I can't get it out. Mr. Fang waved his hand. You can keep your treasure. I didn't ask you about it. Let's go into the city. The grand city built between two high cliffs was very close to them. They looked around and saw many luxurious spiritual boats docked before the city. The people going in or out of the gate were all dressed in robes that emitted bright spiritual lights. They were either young people or grand cultivators with high cultivation strengths. People rode precious rare beasts on the wide streets which could accommodate 8 horse-drawn carriages in different lanes, and they looked either celestial or valiant, obviously not ordinary people. Fraught with extraordinary people, this city was no less prosperous than any city for mortals. let alone the fact that a grand event was happening. Members of major families who were wearing all kinds of luxurious clothes wandered the city. Some looked proud while others seemed aloof. It seemed like they had arrived at a true city of celestial warriors and cultivators. Chapter 424. By a shop. Xuanhuan City looked peaceful and didn't need guards to patrol the city all the time like in Zhuhai City. Fang Qi saw few guards in the city, but it was very safe to walk around as its security level was high. He didn't see anyone who dared to fight inside the city. Taiwangan and the city was especially established to receive the people who were here for the Heavenly Academy in their groups and let them rest. Of course, there were different sections in Taiwangan. The inner section received geniuses from super forces, and the outer section was where Mr. Fang was staying right now. Novelful, however, even the ground of the outer inn was paved with jade-like white stones, and the pillars were made of mystical bronze. Beautifully engraved pavilions and corridors were everywhere. With crowds of young cultivators of excellent talents walking around, it definitely was not an ordinary inn. Li Waya, the elder who had lost one arm, simply bandaged his wound. Although it wasn't difficult for cultivators in spirit state to attach a broken arm back to the shoulder, he still needed a long while to heal the injury. This was why they chose to stay in this inn. The Heavenly Academy is indeed rich, Mr. Fang said in surprise. You just did the registration, and we can now all stay here? After all, these visitors were not the Academy's official disciples until they passed the exam. Li Lanruo said, the Heavenly Academy's grandeur is indeed beyond the imagination of my small family. It's said that someone saw that cultivator of the Zun family. In the long corridor, some passing cultivators talked among themselves as if no one were around. He is said to have been born with a spiritual core, and his innate purple ki repels all evil. I'm surprised that he is also staying here in the Taiwan Inn. Besides the Zun family, I even heard that Nangongzu of the Heaven-Seeking Sword Palace is staying in the Taiwan Inn. Heaven-Seeking Sword Palace? The Nangong family of Heaven-Seeking Sword Palace is always proud of their unique ancient sword Dao. It's said that when Nangongzu was born, colorful auspicious clouds filled the sky, and sword spirit came down from heaven and turned into a sword ball to guard him. With his unprecedented talent in the sword Dao, he had mastered all the sword techniques of the Heaven-Seeking Sword Palace when he was 10. He's the sword son of the younger generation of the Heaven-Seeking Sword Palace. I wonder why he wants to come to the Heavenly Academy. You don't understand, another said. The Heavenly Academy can teach all kinds of talented people. Even the 5th Palace Master of Heaven-Seeking Sword Palace once studied in Heavenly Academy. He is just following the example set by his ancestor. Look over there. How come there's such a big crowd over there? They exclaimed when they saw people packing the corridor at the entrance of the inn. They couldn't see who was entering the inn at all. It's Wang Zi, another big figure. Someone yelled in astonishment. Curious, Mr. Fang walked over and asked someone nearby, is this Wang Zi very famous? You don't know him? The man looked at Fang Qi as if he were a weirdo. Ugh, is it strange that I don't know him? Fang Qi asked. The cultivator said in disdain, brother, have you stayed inside ever since you were born? You don't even know about Wang Zi? If there's a list of the ultimate geniuses in the younger generation of the world, Wang Zi must rank among the top 10. It only shows his strength 10 years ago. Now that he has obtained that item from the Fortune Golden Palace, he can rank among the top 3. Fang Qi was about to ask more questions when someone pulled at his robe. He looked back and saw it was Li Lanruo. She had embarrassment written on her face. Guild President, I'll tell you that after we get back. It felt as embarrassing as asking football fans about Beckham or asking basketball fans who Jordan was. However, Mr. Fang really knew nothing about them. When those cultivators walked away, Fang Qi asked, what is the Fortune Golden Palace? Is it very famous? Li Lanruo couldn't understand him, wondering where this senior came from and why he didn't even know Fortune Golden Palace. She gave him a short explanation. Wang Zi used to rank around the 10th place in the younger generation between the big families. The people ranked above him were geniuses from families such as Nangong and Zun, since the latter were born with great fortune and are surrounded with many grand masters and rare treasures. However, after acquiring a great treasure from the Fortune Golden Palace, Wang Zi had surpassed the geniuses born with great fortune and ranks among the first 3. Do you understand now? She added. The mystic fate jade in my body also came from the Fortune Golden Palace. I got it by chance, but it even drew the attention of huge forces such as Nangong family, and they are trying to hunt me down. Your trash treasure came from that place. Mr. Fang waved his hand. Forget it. Li Lanruo's pretty face turned dark and she felt like spitting blood. If the others heard of her treasure, they would come after her with greedy eyes, but this man kept saying that her treasure was trash. If he was someone else, she would think that he was pretending to be disinterested. But after witnessing Fang Qi breaking the immortal hacking sword array of the heaven-seeking sword palace, she knew that he was telling the truth and put her speculations away. At this moment, Mr. Fang turned and murmured to himself, from the looks of it, the people entering the Heavenly Academy are all powerful. Will Ziyu be bullied? Forget it. I'll think of it when the time comes. Mr. Fang said, you guys stay here. I'll go and buy a shop. Meanwhile, at the edge of the Heavenly Abyss Sea, there were some remains of a spiritual boat on the ground. Several cultivators wearing white robes with patterns of golden sword clouds landed from the sky. The leader was a gloomy-eyed old man with white hair and a white beard. Second elder, this is the Li family's spiritual boat, a cultivator reported. It seems that someone hacked it open with a sword. I think it was a sword ball that broke it. Where are the people of the Li family? The old man asked in a cold voice. Where's Xuanhuan? His life token was broken. Where is his body? We can't find any bodies around this place, another cultivator reported. There's some disordered spiritual essence in the air, and we think it is caused by a battle. Do you think that I can't find you just because you destroyed the corpses? The silver-haired old man snorted. Wherever you go, my Nangong family will get the mystic fate jade sooner or later. Sharp glint flashed in his eyes, and he soon created several extremely mysterious spiritual seals with both hands one after another. The spiritual essence moved in the sky, and the disordered spiritual essence in the air was straightened up. A mysterious scene appeared in the sky. Nangongjuan surrounded a young man who was wearing a blue and white robe with 100 cultivators of the heaven-seeking sword palace. Immortal hacking sword array? Who was this man that forced them to use the immortal hacking sword array? Then, everyone saw the figure make a mocking gesture with a hooked finger just before the immortal hacking sword array enveloped him. However, that figure who was engulfed with the terrifying power of the dragon-shaped sword light reappeared intact in the next instant, but the immortal hacking sword array immediately collapsed. Pucci. With a vicious face, the silver-haired old man spat out a mouthful of blood, and the images in the sky disappeared. Good. Disheveled, his face was as vicious and distorted as a ghost's while he said good 3 times. He dared to slaughter the Nangong family execution hall master and 100 elites. Whoever you are, you will be hunted down and killed by the sword slave of my heaven-seeking sword palace from now on. Chapter 425, Not a big deal to borrow more money when the debt is already high. In the heavenly-seeking sword palace, there was a forbidden zone which all the people in the world were terrified of. It was named the Sword Tomb. However, most people only knew about the infamous name of the Sword Tomb and didn't know why it was so scary. Only the real major forces knew its secrets. The winding paths inside heavenly-seeking sword palace were like a maze. The Sword Tomb was deep inside a mountain within the territory of this force, and the light turned dimmer as the path winded down. The space at the foot of the mountain was as deep as an abyss. An unfathomable darkness and ominous presence threatened to swallow any people venturing inside. There was no light at the bottom of the mountain, as if the people themselves were too afraid of something to light any lights. It seemed that they were afraid to disturb something. Only when they released some weak spiritual senses could they barely recognize the engravings on the walls. They looked like characters but were not in any language in the current world. There were tombs that looked like small hills. There were altogether 108 tombs in the huge underground space. However, most of the tombs had been destroyed, and only about 10 were left standing. In the darkness, one could hear the clanking noise of metal chains. Many people, young and old, knelt before the tombs in tattered clothes and in chains. It said the immortal hacking sword array of the heavenly-seeking sword palace once killed an immortal. Is it true? When Fang Qi turned to leave, Li Lanruo asked curiously. For the cultivators in the current world, true immortals existed only in distant legends, let alone the act of killing an immortal. Most people regarded these tales in the distant past as legends. According to the legends, it's true. Elder Li Wai said. It's said that an ancestral master named Earth 28 from the Nangong family controlled the array, and the heavenly-seeking sword palace paid a heavy price in that battle. It was so long ago that no one knows if it is true. Besides, it is glory of the past. Even if the descendants have inherited the array, It is probably not as powerful as it was. Faint mysterious light came from the dilapidated tombs. The brighter the lights became, the brighter were the eyes of the people chained before the tombs. Under the faint light, one could see that the tombs didn't contain humans. One could only recognize the characters on a few tombstones out of the dozen or so tombs, which were Earth 37, Earth 28, Sky 16. Heavenly Seeking Sword Palace. In the Great Hall, a dignified middle-aged man with a square face was listening to the report of a cultivator of the Nangong family, and he looked calm. Where are they? Have you found out who this person is? Even though Second Elder used the spiritual light recall spell, we still can't find the attacker after all. Even the audience watching the live stream didn't see how Mr. Fang attacked. However, we saw the person who Nangong Juan attacked, and we'll find the true murderer by tracking this man down. But what? The middle-aged man asked coldly. If the attacker is from one of the major families, I'm afraid that it will be troublesome. I don't care what background the attacker has, the middle-aged man said in a cold voice. Even if the Heavenly Academy is involved, let alone the major families, they would have to hand over the murderer if it were their doing. The major families are indeed powerful, but my Nangong family won't let anyone get away from murdering more than 100 members of my family. He waved his hand. Do as the Second Elder said. Go and send a message to Zuor. Tell him that I'll send 2 sword slaves to him. It will be great if he can find the murderer. If not, he can bring back the people revealed by the spiritual light recall spell. Yes. By the way, take the Mystic Fate Jade before the news gets out. Yes. He narrowed his eyes. If this is your trump card, I'll let you know how ridiculous it is. Oblivious to the things that were happening, Mr. Fang's top priority as a professional shop owner was buying a shop and opening it. While he was doing that, he would consider how to prevent Ziyu from being bullied after entering the academy. He didn't care about other things. Wow, this must be a big city, eh? After walking out of Taewangin, Mr. Fang looked around and murmured to himself. This city was not only big but very prosperous. There were all kinds of shops selling things including spiritual artifacts, demon beasts, and elixirs. It was obviously the busiest time of the year for the districts outside Taewangin. Clearly, there was no shop for sale around Dian. Fang Qi had no choice but to go further out. After walking around for a long time and making a large loop, he still didn't find any shop for sale or for lease. When he was about to return to Taewangin, Mr. Fang saw a small old man with gray hair bawling while sitting inside a shop which had been turned upside down. People walked over, wondering what had happened. What's wrong? It said this old guy is so ignorant that he offended someone from the Nangong family. What people from the Nangong family? They are just Nangong family's dogs. Shush. Be careful with your words. It said this old guy worked his butt off most of his life and finally moved his shop to Yuanyang City. But now, he obviously can't keep it open anymore. He will be bothered by the people who are trying to flatter the Nangong family, let alone members of the Nangong family. There's nothing that he can do. After all, they are a big force and can do anything they want. Mr. Fang thought, how come I run into these people wherever I go? In my opinion, he should just sell the shop and leave this place to avoid all the troubles in the future. Sell the shop? Someone said with a snicker. Do you dare to buy it? Do you dare to interfere with the business of the Nangong family? The moment he said it, a figure walked over. Hello, Senior. Is your shop for sale? The cultivator who had been snickering froze while he stared at the young man. Is this man a moron? Where did he come from? The old man stared at Fang Qi in disbelief and said, Young man, do you really want to buy it? He pointed at the people around him. Didn't you hear what they said? Mr. Fang shrugged. My heaven-defying online games guild never fears anyone. Anyway, he had killed more than 100 of them, and it was not a big deal to kill more and create more conflict. All the people around them fell silent. Thank you very much. The old man was full of gratitude. Please will you come in? Chapter 426, The nude shop owner is playing The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3. No. Is he really going to buy it? Has this kid lost his mind? He dares to mess with the Nangong family? It's better to mess with the Heavenly Academy than the Heavenly Seeking Sword Palace. Someone clicked his tongue and said, Everyone who offended Heavenly Seeking Sword Palace met tragic ends. If they send sword slaves after you, they won't stop until you're dead. Go. Let's go now. We can't be seen with him. The crowd that packed the entrance of the shopfront was gone completely very soon. They looked as if they were afraid to catch a plague. Even the old man left the city during the night after selling the shop. He didn't dare to linger in this city any longer. Chief President Li Lunruo and the others walked into the shop. They looked around at the neighboring shops which were packed with customers, and then at Fang Qi's empty shop where even a ghost couldn't be seen. It looked as if the small area in front of his shop divided his shop from others, making it seem like it was in another world. How come your shop has no customers and is quite desolate? Li Lunruo looked around the street in bafflement. Fang Qi pointed at the shop and said, "Come and help me clean it. No matter if you can enter Heavenly Academy or not, you can come and manage the shop for me when you have time." Li Wei said with a chuckle. "Then, I'll just stay here and keep the shop for you. I'm old and won't go and take the academy exam." Li Lunruo said hesitantly. "Then, I'll." While clearing the shop, Mr. Fang said, "You can go to the academy with Ziyu. You two can keep each other company and help run the shop after school." Li Lunruo asked, "Who's Ziyu?" "A little girl. I think you two will get along." "Ugh, a little girl?" Li Lunruo froze. "And only a little over 10? Since when can teenagers enter the Heavenly Academy? Besides, does this little shop need so many people to manage it?" Li Lunruo was full of questions. With the help of the members of the Li family, the shop was soon cleaned. The total area of this shop was even larger than that of the half-city shop, big enough to accommodate 200 computers easily. Since Li Lunruo lived in Taiwangan with her companions, 1 male and 2 female disciples, their accommodation was not an issue for the time being. Besides, the shop had 3 floors, and it was big enough to provide dorms for all the employees, even though the system only renovated 2 dorm rooms. For the time being, the shop provided food and dorms for the employees, but they had no salaries or benefits yet. On the next day, Li Lunruo looked haggard as she came into the shop. Mr. Fang asked in surprise, "What's wrong? Where are the other 2? Only elder Li Wei and a round-faced girl who was about 17 years old came with her. The latter had freckles and puffed red eyes, and she was shy and didn't speak." On the other hand, Li Wei looked angry. "Now," Li Lunruo said in resentment, they are no longer members of Li family." Fang Qi said casually, "It doesn't matter that they left. After all, they can do nothing here but watch and clean the shop, which are chores that they have to do just like when they were servants back in the Li family." "I'm sorry." Li Lunruo looked sad, but Fang Qi brushed it off as a tiny incident that wasn't worthy of his attention. He opened the shop door and saw that the interior had taken a new look. The counter was made with a giant piece of smooth and crystal clear black marble, and the shop door and walls were all glass. More than 200 computers were placed on 2 floors. The first floor was divided into 3 sections, while the second floor was one section itself. Rows of neatly placed monitors and keyboards were lit with colorful lights, the light reflecting off of the smooth and heavy desks. The colorful lights were very eye-catching in the dim space inside. After walking through the entrance, a huge glass screen was to the right, and these people didn't know what it was for. Li Lunruo almost thought that she went into the wrong place. She asked in surprise, "Guild President, what business do we do here?" She had thought that it was a shop selling rare treasures. Now, she knew that she had been mistaken after checking it out herself. She was clueless. "What are these things?" She felt like the inside of the shop was totally another world. Fang Qi chuckled. "Welcome to the Origins Internet Club. In the future, you will work here." He pointed at the rules written on the small blackboard and said, "Show no mercy to anyone who breaks the rules, no matter what background they have." The words on the small blackboard were, "The troublemakers will get their cultivation strengths destroyed before being tossed out. They won't be welcomed again. Play if you want but get out otherwise." Covering their mouths, the 2 girls were so stunned that they were at a loss for words. Even elder Li Wei said in disbelief, "Guild President, aren't the rules a bit too harsh? After all, this city was full of major forces, and many of them had power beyond their imaginations. If any member from these forces got their cultivation strength destroyed and legs broken, the shop would be in huge trouble. Can we modify the rules?" Li Lunruo knew that the person before her was powerful, but compared with some huge forces, his background was probably not as solid as those forces. Fang Qi said, "These are our rules. Play if you want but get out otherwise. If they don't like the rules, they don't have to come." Li Lunruo was at a loss for words. While pointing at the door, she said, "Guild President, I'm afraid that no one will come." Indeed, no one came in as it was deserted in front of the shop. Even the passers-by made detours around the shop. "How could they have customers?" Mr. Fang said, "It doesn't matter if no one comes. We can play ourselves if that is the case." It must be noted that the new shop only had access to the old online games. Single-player games would be released after 3 months. The movies and TV series were not restricted by this rule. Mr. Fang turned on a computer for himself. At this moment, he heard a crisp prompt from the system. Beep. Task. Booming sales is completed. Task target. Number of GTA 5 players reaches 3,000 completed. Task reward. Gaming prize will can win a game on the wheel. 1 luck treasure chest. Task description. It should be a piece of cake for this game to reach the sales target of 3,000, right? This task is completed. Fanky was surprised that the task was completed at this moment. Meanwhile, he received a new task. New online game. Task description. The game can only be activated by unlocking more worldviews. Worldview unlock. Please unlock more sci-fi worldviews. 5 sci-fi games movies reaching average sales of 1,000. Please unlock more magic worldviews. 8 magic fantasy games movies reaching average sales of 1,000. Task reward. Dungeon Fighter Online Virtual Reality Remake. 1 luck treasure chest large. He was surprised that such a task appeared. However, he couldn't do this task yet. He must find a chance to promote the genre of games and movies required for unlocking the worldviews. Right now, he thought that he should turn the prize wheel and open the treasure box. Immediately, Fanky opened the system interface and turned the prize wheel. Beep. You got a new game. The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3. Chapter 427, Scared to Tears. The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3? Mr. Fang was pleased. Although both games were about the Shu Mountain faction, the strength showed in The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3 was much higher than The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 1. Soon, Mr. Fang saw the logo of The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3 appear on the desktop. Guild President, what are you doing? Li Zinner, the shy girl in white of the Li family, asked. The remaining young people of the Li family all had good talent even though they were not as good as that of Li Lanruo who had the mystic fate jade. Li Zinner, Li Waya, and Li Lanruo stood behind Fanky and watched him operate the computer, and they were all in puzzlement. Novelful. Fanky put down the virtual reality headset and asked, would you like to try it? They looked at each other, and Li Lanruo said in the end after some hesitation, I'll try it. Anyway, she knew that this wouldn't harm her. She took the virtual reality headset and put it on following Fanky's instruction. Soon, a round mirror made with green jade appeared on the big screen, and it was resting on the ground paved with green stones. Around the mirror, there were options including new story and old memories. In the mirror, clouds and mist floated around, and it seemed like immortals were living there since majestic palaces and buildings could be vaguely seen. On the mirror were the words The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3. What's this? They were even more puzzled. Following the steps that Fanky told her, Li Lanruo chose new story. Soon, the scene before her changed, and she felt like she entered the world inside the mirror while riding on clouds. She yelled in alarm. External communication was opened by default at the beginning. Guild President, what is happening? I seem to be inside the mirror. What? You entered the mirror? Besides her, Li Zinner and Elder Li Waya were also alarmed. What happened? Can you get out? Don't be afraid. You can just take it as a virtual space, Fanky explained with words that they could understand. A virtual space? Elder Li Waya said in astonishment, is it a mystical realm? After looking around, he saw no mystical realm and wondered if one could enter the mystical realm through this cubic spiritual artifact. This spiritual artifact is so powerful. This went beyond his knowledge of the world. Don't panic. Lanruo, we're behind you. Li Waya said immediately. What do you see inside? On the screen, he saw scenes flash by before Li Lanruo in the mist, and it seemed like Li Lanruo was stepping on an auspicious cloud that was moving at a great speed. When the mist dissipated, they saw an ancient tree which was so huge that they couldn't find words to describe it. Standing before it, a person was as small as one of its leaves. Under the blinding sunshine, the scenes continued to move upward to the heaven. Mountains stood above layers of dense clouds, and celestial palaces were everywhere under the celestial light. She felt as if she had come into the world where the immortals lived. Where is this place? Wide-eyed, Li Lanruo stared at the scene before her, and the word shock couldn't explain what she was feeling. Right now, she wondered if this was really the immortal world. Li Waya and Li Zinner who were behind her stared at the screen in disbelief. This Lanruo, are you in this place? Li Lanruo spluttered and felt like she couldn't put a sentence together. I see it. This looks like the immortal world. Do you see it? She reached out her hand to touch, and each cloud and immortal palace was so real that she couldn't decide if she was in a real world or a virtual space. We see it too. Li Wei's old face was filled with thrill while he pointed at the screen, murmuring, this what happened, Sister Lanruo? She heard an alarming yell. Watch out! Behind you, standing on a cloud, was a figure wearing an indigo immortal robe and a purple golden hat with his hair and clothes flapping in the wind. In the distance, sunlight fell on the top of the 9 layers of white heavenly clouds, making it seem like they were given a golden crown. With an immortal sword in his hand, the man emitted celestial-like presence. He seemed to be a true immortal as described in the legends. The man turned and glanced at a hill hovering in the air, and the hill exploded as if it were hit by an invisible force. Seeing the horrifying sight, screams of alarm rose. Lanruo, run! Calm down, he can't see you. Fang Qi's face turned dark while he explained to them, it seems he can see me. Sure enough, the valiant-looking man who was wearing the immortal robe and purple golden hat spared no glance at Li Lanruo's direction. Instead, he stared at a mighty man who was wearing red gold armor and looked 70% human and 30% demon. He looked like a proud and aloof king or an almighty demon god. Even a tiny trace of his presence or a casual glance from him gave people a terrifying suppression, containing a force that no mortals could withstand. Li Lanruo's jaw dropped, and her mouth turned into a big O shape in which an egg could fit through. The 2 people watching from behind her also felt as if a lightning bolt flashed across their minds. Who are these people? Demon Lord Chonglu, Immortal General Fei Peng. An earth-shaking battle between an immortal and a demon unfolded in the new immortal world. Wherever the sword energies passed by, immortal palaces were cut open like tofu. Even the mountain-high immortal statues were hacked into 2 halves and collapsed. One of them possessed ultimate demonic energy, and one trace of it could turn everything around into dust. The other had sword energies that looked like rainbows, shaking heaven and earth. The people in the audience had never seen such a horrifying battle. They felt as if they were being choked by an invisible force. They opened their mouths wide but couldn't speak. Standing inside the immortal world, Li Lanruo more acutely felt the insignificance of mortals, the grandeur of heaven and earth, and the unimaginable force of the immortals and demons. An innate sense of horror filled her mind while she watched the many sword energies and the destructive demonic light collide with each other with earth-shaking forces. Like a scared rabbit, she put down the virtual reality headset and pointed at the screen, exclaiming in horror, Guild President, what was that? It's terrifying. She was so scared that she almost cried. Mr. Fang was at a loss for words. No wonder you guys live such a miserable life. Can you be braver? It's just a battle between immortals. It's nothing to be afraid of. Then, he dug out a packet of tissues from his pocket and handed it to her. Wipe your tears. I'll show you how to play it. Chapter 428. No customers. Play ourselves to have fun. This is a Jiangxia game, but you played it into a horror game. What will happen if you play the real horror games? In disdain, Mr. Fang put on the virtual reality headset and entered the game. It was still the interlude animation before the game. However, the viewers were still stupefied by just watching the battle in the new immortal world, and when Chonglu destroyed the demon-suppressing tower and took out the demonic sword. The scenes got more stunning as time went by. Guild President, what is this? This is the main business of our shop. Mr. Fang played the game while introducing the basic knowledge about games to them. As employees of the shop, even though you don't play games, you must watch me play and gain some basic knowledge about them, Mr. Fang said earnestly. Then, you can explain them better to the customers. Understand? Ugh. Guild President Li Wei said, can this really increase our cultivation strengths? Can we learn the ultimate techniques of that immortal general? Mr. Fang controlled Jingtian as he got up from the bed and said, see, in this game, I'm the main character, which means that you can obtain whatever the main character learns. There's another thing called movies in which you can observe and learn everything you see. Now, I'll show you how to play this one. They stood behind Mr. Fang and intently watched him play The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3. The guild president got beaten by a beautiful but willful girl. No, he's not guild president but the main character. While they watched, they whispered to each other. Guild president got scolded by the bookkeeper. Shush, he's the main character. Main character. The main character was beaten by the small demon. He's just an ordinary person. They followed the plot until Chonglu walked into the pawn shop to pawn the demonic sword. Isn't he that demon? How come he's here? Exclamations came from behind Mr. Fang. On the screen, Chonglu looked at Jingtian with surprise and disappointment before saying with a sigh, you have come so low. The voice seemed to ooze disappointment and melancholy that had accumulated for thousands of years. When the demonic sword returned to Jingtian's hand, The story of The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3 began. The main plot of this game was reincarnation, in which the characters had forgotten the stories in their previous lives. The audience finally understood that this insignificant character was in fact the reincarnation of the immortal general who had battled with this demon lord in the new immortal world. Immortal General Fei Peng and Demon Lord Chonglu were foes but appreciated each other at the same time. This was the first encounter between Jingtian and Chonglu in the mortal world. All fate and interactions of their previous lives between Jingtian and Chonglu, Zhu Jian, and the demonic sword were going to be revealed in this lifetime, and the audience was brought into a wondrous Jiangxia world. If what happened before could be described as that they had been stunned by the horrifying battle between the immortal and the demon, then they now had a strong wish to learn the stories between these characters and their wondrous adventures. Sister Lanruo, look, the sword can actually follow Jingtian. Watching the scenes on the screen, the shy girl Li Ziner found that the game was quite interesting instead of scary. The awe-inspiring immortal general looks just like us after reincarnation. Li Wei asked, Guild President, can we really learn this stuff? Will we become the reincarnation of this immortal general? They knew that it was just a story, but it looked incredibly real even through the screen. It was unimaginable. Meanwhile, outside the shop, there's a new shop here. A few stylishly dressed young cultivators curiously looked at the shop front. They were about to enter when the clerks from the neighboring shops hurried over to stop them. Lord, you can't enter this shop. Would you come to our shops instead? We can't enter. Why not? They offended someone. They can't afford to offend someone explained. You'd better stay away from this shop. The shop front was even quieter than before. Of course, inside the shop, the employees were bursting with excitement when they learned that they could experience a true immortal's life after reincarnation. Guild President, if we play it ourselves. Li Wei was about to ask if the employees had a discount. However, after glancing at the prices on the small blackboard, which was 80 crystals for activation and 2 crystals per hour for computer time, they could well afford it. Instead, he asked, when we have no customers, can we pay and play the game? Of course. Mr. Fang said. He pointed at the 8 words on the small blackboard and said, don't mind others. Play if you want but get out otherwise. Right. Li Wei said in excitement, play if you want but get out otherwise. He wished that no one would come. Since there were no customers in the shop, Mr. Fang didn't mind his employees acting as customers and playing the game during work hours. You can also watch Jade Dynasty and Shu Mountain. Don't get obsessed with the game, Mr. Fang reminded them. Okay, Guild President. Everyone was busy playing the game. After returning from lunch, Mr. Fang said, don't forget to eat. Guild President. Everyone was busy playing the game. Remember? Okay, Guild. Before they could finish speaking, they saw the message on the screen. Your game time has reached the limit. They all looked at Mr. Fang morosely. Anyone who saw them would cry since it was so sad. Can we play a little more? Just a little. Mr. Fang looked at his employees. Are you here to work or play games? As time went by, the players in the other 2 shops discovered this new game and began to play it without Mr. Fang's recommendation. Devil May Cry 3 was indeed great, but it focused on warriors and was not an ideal game for cultivators. In the game, most cultivators got beaten senseless, and they found that Jiangxia games were more to their taste. Several days passed, and the new shop still had no customers. Besides Li Wei and Li Lanruo, who were busy acting as both employees and customers, no one came into the shop or even asked about their business. This morning, Li Lanruo and the others were about to leave Taiwangan and head to Origin's Internet Club when they heard, look, the little princess of the Jiang family has arrived. Really? Even the little princess of the Jiang family came to the Heavenly Academy? Wang Zi, Nangongzuo, Xuanhuan, including the geniuses who are already studying in Heavenly Academy. My goodness, what a crowd. A message appeared on Mr. Fang's new communication. Jade, boss, is your shop open? Chapter 429. Pick up in a supercar? Mr. Fang still had a lucky treasure chest to open. He had been busy playing The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3, but it was about time to open it. Mr. Fang chose a good day with warm sunshine. After washing his hands, he drank some coke to celebrate this event. Then, he opened the treasure chest. Beep. You got Pegasus Osiris Unlimited. Woo! Mr. Fang almost spat out the coke in his mouth. This was a damn race car. It was a remake of a car from Grand Theft Auto 5. Many cars appearing in Grand Theft Auto 5 originated from the world where Fang Qi had been before he traveled through space and time. For example, The Pegassi Osiris was a supercar based on the Pagani Huayra and Enzo Ferrari knee. If Mr. Fang had gotten such a car before he traveled through space and time, he would have been thrilled. But now he glanced at the low antique buildings and the wide roads. Although the street was wide and flat, there were cultivators walking around, and demon beasts and beast-drawn carriages ran. Then, he thought of his car. Mr. Fang scratched his head. This isn't good. However, he thought back to Dungeon Fighter Online. If this game was released, these people were going to witness satellite beam, gay ball punch, etc. Then, he looked at the spiritual boats flying in the sky. The people here had flying spiritual artifacts, and his was a spiritual artifact for driving on the ground. Suddenly, Mr. Fang didn't think that his car would pose a problem. The intersection of the Taiwan Inn. Everything here was more luxurious than the outer section. Each person here lived in a separate cottage which was spacious and equipped with high-level cultivation infrastructure. In fact, the Heavenly Academy's exam was a threshold for ordinary people to see if they could enter the school, which was the Heavenly Academy's initial purpose of the exam. However, it gradually started to change. Some geniuses had begun to use this opportunity to examine each other's strength and see who was stronger. Even though they wouldn't show all their trump cards and fight until the death, they could use this occasion to compete with each other in front of all the talented people from all over the world to figure out a rough ranking. Of course, this year's Heavenly Academy exam meant more than this. Otherwise, it would be the same as the previous exams. This year's Academy exam was especially grand for 3 reasons. The first reason was the mystic fate jade. Nangongzu came for this treasure. Even though no one knew about its power yet, it was from Fortune Golden Palace, and it was enough for people to go crazy over it. The second reason was Jiang Ziyu was sitting in the courtyard of her private cottage. Princess, Your Highness, Guangzi Zun of the Zun family had this gift delivered to you. Why did he give me a gift? Do I know him that well? Jiang Ziyu was busy playing with her communication jade. A penguin icon kept jumping. She said impatiently, return it. Princess, Your Highness, young Master Nangong of the Nangong family. I told you to return it. Princess, Your Highness, Guangzi Zhu of the Zhu family is waiting outside, hoping to see you. Tell him I'm not back. She continued to play with the communication jade. After all, Ziyu was very popular. However, the most important reason led with the Heavenly Academy. It was said that the winner of the exam would become the final disciple of Gu Tianyan, the old Academy master, and be taught this world-famous Heavenly Insight Scroll. It was said that Gu Tianyan had used this technique to predict several disasters for different clans and families. In fact, even the locations of previous openings of the Fortune Golden Palace and some of the treasures in the palace were obtained by him ahead of time. Many geniuses who had never come out of their respective families came to the exam for this purpose. At the entrance of the internet cafe, when Li Lanruo and the others came to the shop, they saw Mr. Fang playing with a strange sapphire-colored spiritual artifact in front of the shop. The streamlined body of the spiritual artifact looked like a small spiritual boat. But instead of the usual weaving shuttle or sword shape for spiritual boats, the front of this spiritual artifact looked like a weird snake head. It had the same unique metal luster as the square spiritual artifacts computers in the shop. This artifact and all the artifacts inside the shop looked as if they came from a different world. Guild President, what's this spiritual artifact? Li Lanruo asked curiously. It doesn't look like a spiritual boat. Can it fly? No. Mr. Fang glanced at the street and said, flying is strictly forbidden inside the city, right? This thing runs on the ground. It runs on the ground. Li Wai studied the strange spiritual artifact curiously. Why don't you buy a mount if you want to run on the ground? It's cheap and just needs a little time to tame. Why did you get a spiritual artifact? For cultivators, they could produce ground artifacts but didn't think it was necessary with so many demon beasts around. At this moment, some passing cultivators pointed in their direction. Look at that guy. Is that thing a spiritual boat? You're kidding. What kind of spiritual boat has wheels? Can it fly in the sky as well? I wonder who designed this weird spiritual boat. What a sucker. Ignoring them, Mr. Fang glanced at his communication jade. Hey, Guild President, how come your communication jade looks different? Li Lanruo looked over curiously. Usually, communication jades were rectangle or round, but the one in Fang Qi's hand was a thin jade slip with complicated patterns. When the jade lit up, a virtual screen appeared on it, and a spiritual cursor moved on the virtual screen. Meanwhile, Jiang Ziyu walked out of her private cottage holding a communication jade that looked exactly like Fang Qi's. The young master of the Zun family is holding a banquet in Essence Celestial Pavilion today and invited many people to tour Xuanhuan City. Why didn't you reply to his invitation? You must express your appreciation to the people who send you gifts even if you don't accept them. The message came from her mother. Why should I accept his invitation? I won't go today. Boss released a new game, and I'll go play the game. She quickly said to the communication jade, Boss, when will you come and pick me up? I don't know the way. Glancing at this message, Mr. Fang thought for a moment and then looked at the race car before him. Should I drive over and pick you up? Chapter 430, Still Your Boss. Drive over? Jiang Ziyu blinked. Boss, did you buy a carriage? I wonder what kind of demon beast is pulling his carriage. She looked up into the sky and said, it could be as good as mine. My mount is a prehistoric rare beast, the best of the best. I'll scare the dumb boss a little with it. She smiled smugly. After all, she was no longer the girl who had no money but had a big appetite. Meanwhile, Mr. Fang had gotten in the car. You guys watch the shop for me. I'll go pick up someone and be back soon. Well, Guild President Li Lanruo looked at the doors of the spiritual artifact that were opened like a pair of metal wings, saying, no flying spiritual artifacts can fly inside Xuanhuan City. Can your small flying boat, can it work? Different from Half City and Zhuhua City, Xuanhuan City's array deactivated all the flight spiritual spells and thus didn't need guards to patrol the city. Even the people with powerful backgrounds and privileges couldn't fly in the city. Look, this hillbilly from somewhere wants to activate a spiritual boat inside Xuanhuan City? Many passing cultivators said in disdain while looking at Fang Qi and riding on their demonic horses. In the next moment, with the sound of tires grinding on the ground, a blue shadow shot out, leaving a puff of dust behind it. What was that? How come there is such a spiritual artifact? Today, Guangzi Zun invited all the geniuses to a banquet in Essence Celestial Pavilion and to ride around the city together afterwards. A young man riding a black tiger laughed and said, I'm surprised that I'm on Guangzi Zun's list. He is inviting me to this gathering. Congratulations. His guards immediately offered their congratulations. I spent a fortune on this 9-pattern demonic tiger. He pointed at his mount smugly and asked, do you think Guangzi Zun will like? Before he could finish, a weird-shaped sapphire blue spiritual artifact flashed past them. What was that? They looked baffled. Even the demonic tiger blinked in shock, thinking that its eyes played tricks on it. I think it's a spiritual boat. How can a spiritual boat run on the ground? That young master waved his hand. Let's go and have a look. Sir, you have a pair of sharp eyes. This wine-patterned horse is absolutely a treasure in my shop. It runs so steadily that you'll feel nothing riding on it. A young man led a big handsome horse out of a shop. He patted the horse on the back and said, not bad. Not. He looked up and saw a blue tornado flashing past him. It was so fast and steady that it looked like it floated along the road. The young man pointed at the fast disappearing spiritual artifact and asked, can it be as steady as that thing? The shop owner's face turned dark and didn't reply. The young man immediately mounted the horse. Go, follow it. He was curious. What was that thing in front of the beast stables of the Taiwan Inn? Guangzi Zun. Please. Brother Nangong. Brother Zhu. Gentlemen. Please. A dignified-looking young man wearing a green robe cupped his hands to the people around him. The guy that he called Brother Nangong was a big figure, and he had a wide face, a wide forehead, and a mild expression. Suddenly, someone pointed at the entrance. Isn't she? A cute lowly wearing a plain white dress walked out the gate while dragging a rare and majestic white deer with her. Well, it has been a long time since I came out with little Belle. The lowly rubbed the big white deer's fluffy head, looking quite pleased. The white deer had a pair of silver bells hanging on its neck, and they tinkled while it walked. Isn't she the little princess of the Jiang family? How come she's here? She declined Guangzi Zun's invitation. I wonder where she's going? With a polite smile, Xuanhuan walked over and asked, Sister Jiang, where are you going? Should I give you a lift? No, I don't need it. Jiang Ziyu shook her head and patted the big white deer's head. Little Belle, let's go. At this moment, piercing roars that sounded like they came from tigers and dragons appeared from the depth of the beast stables. Instantly, dark clouds gathered in the sky as if an ultimate demon was about to come out. Then, they heard a series of ear-deafening roars. Hearing this roar, The other demon beasts inside the stables all knelt as if they were at the bottom of the food chain and had heard the roar of an existence at the top. The fear that came from the bottom of their hearts turned the whole stables into an uproar. Ugh, little Belle, what's wrong? Jiang Ziya's big white deer also had panic in its eyes and couldn't move even though she pulled. Nangongzuo's face turned dark. That damn beast of mine is making trouble again. Wait for me for a few seconds. After a black flash, he vanished. Then, he came out from the beast stables while riding on a black horse with one horn covered in pitch-black scales. It looked as if it had been transformed from some other demon beast. When the black horse walked out, Jiang Ziya's white deer's legs turned to jelly and couldn't move at all. Hey, little Belle, what's wrong? Jiang Ziya pulled, but it didn't budge. Angry, she rested her hands on her waist and stomped her feet. Someone chuckled on the side and said, I think this little deer is frightened. At this moment, she received a message on her communication jade. Ziyu, where are you? I'm in front of the beast stables of the Taiwan Inn. She was furious. After sending the message in anger, she glared at her big white deer. Why are you so cowardly? Brother Nangong. With a light sigh, Xuanhuan shook his head and said, your mount is perfect in every aspect other than its bad temper. Princess Jiang, if you are in a hurry, you can ride my mount. Who wants to take your mount? Jiang Ziyu was furious that such a thing would happen when she took her little Belle for an outing. At this moment, they heard a strange sound coming from the distance. Then, with a blue flash, a weird-shaped spiritual artifact raced over and steadily stopped before Ziyu. The car windows slid down, and Mr. Fang poked out his head. Ziyu, get in the car. Ah? Dumbfounded, Jiang Zhao pointed at Mr. Fang's car. Isn't it? It's the Pegasus Osiris supercar. Very awesome. Do you want to have a ride in it? Mr. Fang arched his eyebrows. Yes, yes, yes. Jiang Ziyu yelled cheerfully and then glanced at little Belle by her side. But my little Belle can't move now. Mr. Fang got out of the car and pressed a button on the car key. The roof of the car retracted, and Mr. Fang threw the big white deer onto the back seat. Let's go. Get in. He put on his wine-blocking sunglasses and drove away with the excited Jiang Ziyu and the baffled white deer. The others were left behind in the dust.